Hello class, my name's Alberto Lopez and I will be talking to you about disaster management in South Africa. South Africa is a former British colony which gained independence in 1934. It was under the apartheid regime from 1948 through 1994 and it has been a republic since 1961. South Africa has an area of 1.2 million square kilometers with about 3,000 kilometers of coastline. It also has a semi-arid climate, and some of the environmental issues affecting it include increasing demand for water, increasing agricultural pollution, soil erosion, and desertification. In the historical emergency management context of South Africa, mainly what we see before 1994 is civil containment. You don't necessarily have big responses to floods and droughts, especially farther away from the bigger cities and in more rural areas where most of the people that lived were minorities. Now, you do have examples of fighting floods, especially in the 80s and the 90s, and also fighting droughts, but you don't really have any overarching national structure to manage disaster efforts. Now, since the Cape Flat floods of 1994, there was more of a push for having an integrated system, which didn't come about till 2002, which we'll talk about. In 2000, there were some particularly bad floods that left about 36,000 households homeless. In 2007 and 2013 are the most recent examples of large floods. 2007 affected Cape Flats again. 2013 affected a more wealthy suburb of Cape Town. Now, the Disaster Management Act of 2002, essentially it says that the government must provide a coherent, transparent, and inclusive policy on disaster management that is appropriate for the Republic as a whole. And also, in doing so, it will create an integrated, coordinated disaster management system. Now, the main three parts of the Disaster Management Act of 2002 are the creation of the Intergovernmental Committee on Disaster Management, the National Disaster Management Advisory Forum, and the National Disaster Management Framework. The committee, essentially what it does is it advises the cabinet. The forum essentially recommends policy and includes non-governmental actors, so unions, business associations, NGOs, and the framework sets up various systems to deal with disasters, and that could be things from directories to new plans and things like that. Now, the National Disaster Management Center is sort of like the FEMA of South Africa, except it is not as centralized, doesn't have as much power as we'll talk about in a minute. Now, the provincial and municipal levels have these institutions essentially replicated, so you have a sort of a carbon copy of what exists at the national level. The main participants in South Africa is, first and foremost, the government. They're the biggest player in disaster management. Next, perhaps NGOs. One of them, especially that I was interesting to research about, is called Ground Up, and essentially what they do is they do some journalistic reporting, but they also do a lot of advocacy for disaster management issues. There's also business associations, unions, and especially local community involvement. That's something that South African government is really pushing for. The military and security forces have been less involved since the fall of the apartheid regime, except in cases of large floods when a lot of large rescue operations are needed. Now, some of the obstacles that you can find in South Africa is a lack of centralization of the National Disaster Management Center. Essentially, the Disaster Management Act of 2002 does not give the Disaster Management Center the money to be able to do what they need to do. They give the money to the Act gives the money directly to the departments, and the departments implement whatever projects they see fit which really doesn't allow for a single concentrated view of what to do next, what's the guiding force for the disaster management system in South Africa. There's also a lack of funds, especially at the local level, which means that you can't really have a very useful bottom-up approach, and what you really have is confused implementation pattern due to these same financial constraints. And there's also a need for investment in newer technologies. There's only four radar stations in South Africa that are able to detect storms or incoming cyclones, and and big issues like that. And especially with climate change, this is becoming an even more important issue. I hope you all enjoy the presentation, and I look forward to getting your questions.